Okay, well, I guess we can start with our call. Should we
Bryson, you're frozen for me. Ricky's moving, my screen's moving, but now only Bryson.
No, he's good. He freezes sometimes, but you think he's good.
All right.
It's still, I think as long as it's up on mine, it should be fine.
Okay.
And we'll find out if it's frozen. It's whatever. But all right. So, Kevin, you were on my last podcast. So, do you still want to give just an ultra quick introduction, and then everyone can find out in the last podcast if they want to hear more about who you are?
Yeah.
For a quick rundown.
Real quick. I live down in Virginia with the Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps. And I work with Bryson and Ricky designing the shows for Newtown Indoor Percussion. I think that's probably all we need for this, right?
Yeah. Ricky, since you have never been on the podcast, do you want to give a slightly more lengthy version of your introduction to who you are?
I can go super lengthy. Here we go.
You can get some going. You have some time.
No, not a lot. I'm Ricky Grasso. Been in the marching arts activity since 2007. From Newtown, Connecticut. Ended up doing the Connecticut Hurricanes and Newtown on trumpet. And then I went to the Blue Knights out of Denver, Colorado. Worked out there on trumpet. And then I was the tour director there for about 3 years. So I was involved with the organization total for about 5 years. Came back to Connecticut, took over the visual caption position for Hurricanes for a year, and I've been at Newtown for a grand total of about 13 years. The last 8 have been on the education side, and the last 5 have been as a director in both the marching band program and the percussion program for the winter.
Awesome.
And I also designed the shows too with these 2 people. Yeah, and that's all.
Yeah, so we are essentially the core design team for Newtown High School. Awesome. I wonder if that records in Skype.
I love that.
So I suppose what I wanted to talk about with you guys is kind of going off of my last 2 podcasts, talking about design, kind of encapsulating that into this, where we talk about the show that we made, how it came to be, things we think we improved upon, what we had to do, and then now that we've reached the end very early, we can kind of talk about the outcome. I planned on doing this way later, but here we are. So I think it's just good for us to also just reflect on mistakes we made, especially. It also was good, like I was saying, but give a perspective on a younger design team, not only doing all of the designing, but doing all the teaching as well. And Kevin, when you were here, you were also doing the teaching with us. And I guess to that note, kind of the whole foundation of all of this, we have a larger challenge ahead of us of having to not only come out of the drum corps activity and try to teach at a high level and learn how to teach, but also design from the ground up, also at a high level. So we have to kind of balance between the two. Do we have any thoughts on, maybe how that differs from the average, snare drummer that comes out of DCI, starts teaching? It's kind of interesting because we have all these multiple responsibilities, and we might be behind on either or, depending on which one we want to focus on and further more than the other. So Kevin or Ricky, do you have any feelings about that? Even if you don't have like a lengthy response, totally cool.
Yeah, I can jump on that real quick. Because when I started teaching, that was kind of what you just said, coming out of drum corps and just worrying about teaching like the snare drums, for example. That's exactly what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot less involved in the sense like there's a lot less depth with what you're being asked to do. And then the hardest thing for me moving into more of like the design and teaching role was understanding that as your responsibilities increase, you can't actually go as deep into that one specific thing. And that was, I think, the thing I struggled with the most, was trying to be a caption head designer and still a full-time snare tech at the same time. And right. I caught myself way too much worrying too much about like the little details of like the end snare drummer's left hand or something, and then forgetting the big picture. And that was something I didn't really figure out until I stopped teaching completely, and now I'm only designing. So now it's much easier to only look at the big picture, and like if something's weird in one kid's left hand, it doesn't really matter, or at least it's not my job to worry about it, you know.
Right. Yeah. Because I mean, it's more efficient, you know, when you have a full staff too. And I guess there's pros and cons to both. But if you're just that snare drummer trying to teach, you know, you can just hone in on that completely and just make that your whole focus, and then, you know, make the whole process effective. We don't necessarily have that exact thing going on, but for you now you have the design part, so it's interesting from your perspective. And Ricky, you're also the director of our ensemble, so you're not only working with parents, you know, figuring all the logistical stuff out, financial stuff, but you're also staging the show, doing pretty much most of the choreography along with Sarah. You know, what are your thoughts in terms of how you're kind of spread out and having to do everything at the highest level you possibly can?
Sure. When I started teaching, I wasn't that great of a marcher. I knew how to march, right? Like I never thought I was an outstanding marcher by any means, but I knew how to teach feet. And then when I went on tour and came back, I was like, okay, I know how to teach this body thing. So at the most bare bones, basic level, so I can, you know, start going from there. Here's a damn plie, and then we'll go, you know, into more things after that. And now we're doing jump turns, sit rolls, and jazz splits, and whatever, you know, what have you. But anyway, how we got there is when I would start teaching, I would kind of get in the mind of a performer. Because it's like, you know, I was never that outstanding performer. I was never, granted, well, I performed my heart out, but I mean, like, from a basic standpoint, I was never that person. I just knew what I was doing. So anyway, I would get into the mind of performer and know what their capabilities are as I started teaching and kind of getting in the head of somebody that age. And I like to think I'm pretty good with that, adapting to, you know, whatever age group or demographic or audience I have in front of me. I like to think I can tailor my message to that kind of person. So as we got more into the design and, you know, less to me, well, actually, I never really stepped away from the visual standpoint. But when I got more into the design, I started to kind of enhance the basic level performance needs, you know, what I mean, kind of thing, because I knew where it started and where it could go. And it would, like, you know, people would say, like, do you think it's a bit advanced for them? I'm like, no, I think if you just give this to them, then they'll just, you know, enhance their program over time. I think it's kind of inevitable that's going to happen. So from a design standpoint, when I'm thinking, you know, what's visually most effective and generally effective and, you know, whatever that is, I go back to that mindset of the performer and kind of remember what they can and can't do. And in reality, with at least my visual program, the limit is endless for me, just because I've been there since their day one and know what they're capable of, and I'm going to push them until, you know, we can't really go anymore, I guess. So there's that from the visual standpoint.
How do you feel that conflicts with everything else? You know, like obviously you have to do the directing thing, but at times do you feel like you're being pushed and pulled in a way where it's like I have to do one thing over the other, or are you constantly trying to maintain a balance of everything at once, making sure everything's at a high level? Like, do you have a choice sometimes where it's like it has to be this over this?
Yeah. It's a really weird question, something I really haven't been asked before. And it's funny, I talk to other directors and stuff like that, and like the director is normally like the band director or the music person or somebody that's not, you know, assisting in writing a show, doing all the choreography, staging the show, and then having to deal with the parents, the money, the fundraising, the kids, their needs, all that stuff. It's not normally all one person. So sometimes I feel like you're right, I'm pulled apart as like 3 to 4 different people. But honestly, I just prioritize on Sunday. You know, what do I have to write for Monday and Wednesday? What do the parents need for Tuesday, Thursday? What's the game plan for Saturday? Just kind of always thinking 1 to 2 to 5 steps ahead, just so I know what's coming on the docket, so I can just be best prepared. And there's only been, I mean, small situations where I'll be at rehearsal and I'll have to run to a parent meeting and like I'll be like, okay, guys, you could take this over. Like, you know what I mean? It's really the only instance where I'm literally pulled because I have to go, or talk to a kid or talk to a parent or something. But I'm really able to kind of do everything just because I know how to manage my time and I know how to, kind of delegate and divvy up what I need to do. For instance, Sarah teaching technique and stuff while I'm off doing something else or whatever it is. And then you teaching something to the drums while I'm doing something with the cymbals. It's like I'm able to always kind of delegate and divvy up and stuff. So
yeah, and I feel like we've done a good job, more or less, about trying to stay passionate about each individual area. It's like, well, I do like design the most, and I feel like design comes more naturally to me in a way, or it's a little more intuitive. I still am like obsessed with the technique aspect of playing drums, almost more so than the idea of just cleaning beats. I just have a really huge interest in how new players can become as good as possible in a short period of time, and a lot of that still comes with like trying things and figuring out like what's going to work. Like Kevin, we've been super into, just as of the past week, just like Murray Gussick stuff, kind of stemming from when we were first introduced to stick yoga. And then there's the whole clapping thing and just all the other things that he introduced on the West Coast while he was working with Vanguard and such. So I guess that's kind of just the encapsulating background behind everything we're trying to do. We don't have the normal situation. We're just a bunch of young kids trying to build a program on our own.
For real, we walk into a judges meeting and they're like, "That's it? This is you guys?" Like very young. Like literally, that's always the first response we get whenever we sit down at a table. So I for real, I get it.
Because it almost feels like everything's there, everything's going the right direction, but it's still, I don't know. It feels like it's still a slowed down process, but I also don't have a gauge for quality in other areas or in other states and circuits of the activity versus the amount of time it's taken to get to that type of quality. I don't know. But yeah, so that's just the general background. But
Bryson, I don't mean to monopolize, but I think about your point though. The reason we're so detailed, like you said, you love teaching the drums down to its basic, most fundamental rudiment. I mean, I'm the same way. I'm super big picture. I know where I want your eye to see and whatnot, but I'm going to tell you to point your damn toe, and I'm going to tell you if I don't have like if I don't know how to do something and like I need it technically said to the children, I'm going to have Sarah be like, "Hey, tell them how to point their left pinky so they don't die." Like it's stuff like that where like we're so there for those minute details of that big picture. I think that's why it gets seen the way it does,
That's true.
To your point.
Yeah. And I guess to branch off of this and kind of move along forward. So we had a show called Bloom. Ironically, I didn't know when we made it that the Broken City trilogy thing was called Bloom. I actually had no idea about that. So I felt kind of ding-dong about naming it Bloom. But I guess, so did that originally stem from the bus ride home from Dayton when I was talking about the like the Thoughts Inside Your Head show? It was like way darker. It was like the Exorcism of Emily Rose tune.
We were at Eastern Power, Bryson.
Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we talked about that. I think I remember being there when we were talking about this whole idea and just kind of thinking like, oh, this is the first idea of many that we'll throw out over the next couple months, and then every single conversation we had after that kept coming back to that original concept.
I don't even remember that. I wonder if that's when no, it was definitely before I saw Suspiria for the first time. Because Suspiria is what made me want to like encourage you, Ricky, to do as much as possible with choreography and integrating it.
Yeah.
So I just loved it.
Times. Yeah, it was Eastern Power, by the way. Yeah, because it was the bowling alley, and I kicked Kevin off. Yeah, the bed. Yep. Yeah, that was it.
Oh wow. Okay, so I guess that was the origination of that. I just not even a word. But so that kind of marinated, I suppose, for a while. Man, I don't even remember picking music for that. I guess that was just an idea, but that eventually morphed in our own conversations, I think, over time. And then Kevin, I think you had to play catch up all the time because we were just kind of popping it off in our Facebook chat. You're like, oh, sick. Is it
different? at the end of each day, I'd like come back to like 100 new messages and be like, oh, okay, so this is the show now. Got it. And then the next day, 100 new messages. It's like, oh, okay, so now this is the show. Cool. All right, got it.
Yeah.
And And I always was just like a step behind. But,
right.
And we can get into that more later, maybe. But
Yeah.
Because I don't necessarily think from my role that was a bad thing either. But
yeah. So I guess that turned into, jumping ahead to the first time. Maybe you and I, Ricky, were calling over the phone while I was at Spartans, kind of towards the end of the series or end of the season. Jeez. Regarding like the flower thing, and I guess that started to turn into the idea.
June. It was June because I went to the gym and then I had a revelation. Yeah, because it was because we were talking about it so much, and I was like, what could the thing like visually portray? Because we hadn't thought about Bloom yet, we hadn't thought about anything, and like, we're thinking, something that opens, something I don't even know what the original idea. It was just thoughts inside your head, but how do you personify those thoughts inside your head? What is the object? What is the motivation? Like,
Yeah. And then I guess I jumped to dandelions at one point, and I started writing a script for that or whatever, and then we kind of bounced that off each other for a while.
Yeah, because the original was like a tulip. It was like a tulip opening, and I had this whole floor idea and the prop, and it was too much. And then
I'm glad we didn't do that.
Yep, I know.
We already discussed colors and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think musically, the first thing that I sketched out was based around a tune from the movie Hereditary. I think it was Funeral, because I really like the sound of the it's not a bari sax, kind of like a contra sax. It's huge. It's really wild to see him play it. It's like Colin Stetson. So I started like pitching down saxophone samples and wrote stuff around that, and it wasn't really working. But that was the first time, Kevin, you introduced the metric mod idea, which, funny enough, like really didn't have quite much of a correlation at that point. At least not as much as when we, got to the point where we finished the show and stuff.
At that point we were really just like, I was seeing that much more as like, okay, just what's bouncing around in our heads right now. Just put it out, put it on paper, and then sit on it and see where it goes. And I think from both of our ends, that's very much like kind of what happened.
And I think
we didn't use any of it, but it was a springboard for sure.
Yeah. I think the only thing we kept was that idea. We just ditched everything else. Because oh, go ahead.
Well, we kept it, but in a completely different way.
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty sure the first thing I wrote was just literally like one whole phrase of just full battery, like metric modulations, fast, slow, like.
Yeah.
Definitely not what we ended up actually doing.
Right. I guess that just like one little snippet of the that whole thing. So we ditched that whole thing. And I guess to give everyone context, we ended up using that to kind of represent not finishing phrases, and that kind of tied into the whole concept. But I guess, do we want to overlay the concept really quick, not get too bogged down in this, and just kind of go over what the show turned into and how that came to be, just so we can start really digging into, mistakes that we made, or things that we thought we did well. I guess to start that, it was essentially sticking to the ideas of dandelions instead of this flower that we originally had. And we wanted to have a show based around the idea of change, whether it be positive or negative, just feeling like something's wrong and that you truly need something different. But you can be afraid to change because you don't want to affect other people and make a negative effect on people's lives that are maybe going to be the direct result of something you want to do with your life. And not being able to say that just because you're afraid of that. So we have this kind of cycle of, I want to say something, like I just don't quite know what it is. My thoughts feel like dandelions scattered in the wind. Essentially, that's kind of our cheesy phrase to let us use the floor that we had and use the dandelion idea, and sticking to the dandelion instead of the flower, because when it blooms, it's just kind of, it's still part of the sunflower family, but it's pretty average, but it has still strong symbolism. I think I've noticed in marketing, like I've talked to you, Ricky, I see that everywhere. It has a presence to it, but it's not magnificent or anything. It's not like a bright lotus flower or something. And then that idea kind of rolled into the narration, rolled into the floor design, and inevitably into the music that we decided to use. But do you want to talk about the visual, just the aspect, the aesthetic that we use? And I think, Kevin, you were also a part of designing this as well.
Don't worry, I was going to give him a shout out.
Somehow.
So yeah, absolutely. We have this awesome band parent who's super great with graphic design, and she, like, if anybody knows, like, when I try and explain something, I don't really know how to use my words. I'm really bad at it. I'm just like, you know what I mean? And like, no. But then Bryson will come up with something that I know exactly what he knows what I mean. But anyway,
Keywords.
you know, so I told Joni, I said, hey, I need, you know, a floor with like a girl like throwing up, and she's like, what the hell? I'm like, no, like throwing up like into a flower, like, you know what I mean? She's like, no, I don't. And I was like, all right, so open the girl's mouth, open it wide, and have just spewing, you know what I mean? And she's like, actually, yeah, I get it. So found this image of this like woman with a, you know, something open in her mouth, like a cornucopia of like flowers, you know, just like going from her mouth. And, you know, the whole point of it was we rehearsed at a really small space. So I wanted to get kind of this, like, not 3-dimensional, but would you say it's 2-dimensional, guys, with the flap?
Yeah.
I mean, it's still definitely 2-dimensional.
Right.
It's definitely 2-dimensional.
It's
Yeah,
just
so something that was
not a
A
rectangle.
little oblong.
Yes. So something that wasn't a square, something that kind of sets us apart. It's a little different. So we had a flap that kind of ran about 12 feet past where the floor stopped. So anyway, there was that. It was green that meshed into the blooming yellow flowers, and around all the edge of the green was dandelion flakes. And in the back was just a woman with her eyes kind of closed with her mouth open. Just looked like she was breathing. You know, breathing is a big thing in the show. I'll explain the visual movements later. But anyway, when it came to uniforms, Kevin, Bryson, and I were in a hotel room, and we're trying to figure out, you know, what we're gonna do. This is like October, like with uniforms, and we're stuck. The uniform is like the last piece to the puzzle. I had everything else done, and normally I'm good with this. It's done in like September, whatever. No, so Kevin was like, "Why don't they just blend into the floor?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" It's like, they can't. Like, no matter what I get, it's not gonna blend. He's like, "No. Just have them like blend like into the floor, like the green and the black and the what." And I'm like, Kevin,
with the dandelions and stuff, right?
Right.
The dandelions are on the floor and on the back of the uniform.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So
the green at the front.
So then he's like, "You're Ricky, you'll figure it out." And I was like, "I don't know what that statement means, and I don't like you. So I guess I'll figure it out." And it ended up that we just literally took the graphic that was on the black, which is the dandelion, the flake version, and the graphic that's on the front green, on the front of the uniform, which was the throw-up path, if you will. So we ended up getting this whole visual package that was so cohesive because it was all the same graphic. So it was like the graphics spread across the entire ensemble, and it came out super freaking cool. So I was really excited about that. But I won't get into body now. You guys can talk about your stuff.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but that we did the visual stuff before we truly wrote the actual first part of the show, right? More or less.
That was the whole point. You guys, we always try and get the visual package done in like September, October. That way we could start writing, not even writing beats, but just figuring out where the show is going to start and then maybe end, and then the middle stuff. So yeah, the visual stuff is really important. Yeah.
I feel like that had a strong effect. Kevin, I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel like this is something that this year especially we did. I mean, we created the environment. I mean, theoretically, you could interpret it as floor being the inner part of someone's head, and that kind of like green path is just their visualization of where they want to be, and then the dandelions on the floor are kind of our literal and metaphorical interpretation of the scattered thoughts around that general path. But we were given almost like a space and a color palette and an aesthetic to use to influence the writing. Do you feel like, at least with the front and battery, that even aside from the electronics, that you were given ideas or maybe were subconsciously influenced by that aesthetic?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was probably more subconscious than anything. And I'm always trying to get to a place where I can take something, be influenced by it, and know exactly what it is that I'm going to create. But I'm not in that place yet. It's still a lot of trial and error and just kind of trying to make something that feels good. But I think subconsciously thinking back on it, like a lot of the decisions that I made with the way things were orchestrated, especially because that was a lot different than what we had done in the past. And just the overall structure and flow of like who's playing when. I think that all felt a little bit more coherent to me from the start.
Yeah.
It felt a lot less open-ended. And I think that definitely was influenced by the fact that we kind of had this visual representation nailed down completely.
Yeah.
So it's just like there were certain things that like, oh, that would be really awesome musically to do, but it would make no sense whatsoever. So it's like it at least, if anything, just saved me time of writing something that just completely didn't work and then having to do it again.
I guess just logistically, it gave you a situation where you could do the best you could, just because we had the storyline and more or less had what's the visual aspect. It's almost like scoring to a movie. Like you have the story and the visual thing, and you just kind of
and it was much less open-ended than the previous two seasons, where it was just kind of write whatever I want, and if it doesn't work, delete it and do something else. And then just it was a very kind of stream of consciousness approach, where it's just like I write this and then I write that, and it's like, oh, what's going to feel good next? And this time was definitely, it felt a little bit more prescribed. And ultimately, like, that was really scary to me at first, and it took me a long time to get going. But it's just like as soon as I hit that, like as soon as I hopped on board with that, the show was done in like a couple weeks.
Yeah. And I think the simplicity aspect also helped a lot too. We didn't use any props. I'm actually a fan of not using props. I think there's so much to be done with the floor and the costuming. Obviously, if props are necessary, you feel like, all right, this would be perfect for this, then by all means do it. But there is no like gimmick aspect to it necessarily. I mean, maybe you could say the front and back of the uniform and then going into the floor thing is a gimmick, but I feel like it's a little bit not sophisticated, but makes sense and is more of like an aesthetic gimmick that feels good, as opposed to like, here's a stage, we're going to do a solo on the stage. I don't really like that stuff very much.
Well, Bryson, to your point, the uniform was the prop, like it is so difficult. I'm saying it is so difficult to have a uniform that is completely different colors from the front to the back, just because if their slightest bit off, it will be wrong and your eye will be drawn to it. So it's like the kids, I thought, did such a great job in like, identifying their angles and knowing exactly where to be, when to be there, what counts, just because your eye was drawn to those little vignettes just simply because of the uniform. We didn't really need a prop to kind of turn around or move or anything. It was all their bodies, Yeah,
and it's interesting because I mean that's not a new concept necessarily. I mean, like Gone is the first show that I think of by Rhythm X 2008, where they did the whole. Are you live, Ricky? Okay, there you go. Talking about Gone, have you seen that show, Ricky? Probably not. So yeah, I mean it's just they're blending in, like Gone, name of the show, literally disappearing. It was really good. It's one of my favorite Rhythm X shows. But there's also a high school in California that we were going to compete with. That was doing a similar concept. And I guess we were doing the same thing, but it was like in a much different context, I guess, or it's, I guess, a little bit more sophisticated, or it's just not quite literally like, oh, we're here, now we're not, kind of thing. It just has a different purpose that maybe it's not normally used. But I don't even know where I was going with that, but yeah. So I guess it's a uniform prop idea that has been done before, just slightly differently. Yeah. I'm sure there might be someone else that's done, same idea, same thing, but in a different context. But yeah. So I guess moving along from that. So musically, like quite literally, like the stuff we're using, I don't know if I was just shoving Bloom at you guys, the Radiohead tune that Tom York rearranged on solo piano, the one that Chino Hills also used. Just wild. I'm surprised someone else actually used it in the same year. Someone that would actually know too. But we use it completely differently. So, I mean, my idea for that tune was to, and I think I explained this at like the show reveal that we did for the kids, is that not only does it sound good to me, it just feels like a good song. I like listening to it. I think it has strong emotional context and all that. It had the right vibe for the floor, but I mean, it was written by Tom York, who is quite literally writing about, the fact, at least this is my interpretation, how he's writing music and making a living off getting the thoughts out of his head, and it's kind of just a part of his life, and it affects him in different ways. And I thought it was interesting to use that because we're talking about trying to speak and release thoughts, and it's coming from a very authentic place of him just talking about his experience with that, and how he's just kind of revealing stuff to the world, and how it's the bane of his existence, but it's still, something that's difficult for him. And I thought the idea of using something like that, and having the context of us wanting to do something that's authentic, kind of starting with the script is where we started talking about that, like not trying to rhyme or anything, and letting that kind of give birth, so to speak, to everything else. It kind of sets the tone. I mean, it's the first thing we're working with, and we kind of based it around that. But what was interesting is that, Ricky, you added the dark horse of the choir tune from that guard show you really liked. So we were finding ways to integrate that right away. I mean, I think I started the show with a sample of that. Once I understood the sampling rules for WGI, that really changed everything for me personally. But how do you feel about how that choir tune correlated with Bloom? And I guess to be specific, that was the Pascalia by Caroline Shaw with Room Full of Teeth. What show was that? The guard show?
Yeah, it was Braddock Independent 2014, I think. They were all gold. It was cool, but a lot of other guards have used that show. I've used that song in different instances, but that was like most of their show. Bryson, honestly, like that sound, it just felt like an extension of what Tom York was saying if he had said it, if that makes sense. That's really weird to say, but if Tom York was able to like get it out and like say it, I felt like that would be the language he would use, because it's something that you can't really describe, but it's loud and you can feel it and you can hear it. And I know that's really weird to like kind of say out loud, mainly because
I see what you're saying.
I haven't really been asked to talk about that, but maybe Kevin, you could think about that too, like, right? Like, what do you think of that?
Because you have an outside point of view, you're like, all right, here's Bloom, here's this choir.
That's actually interesting because, definitely the outside point of view. Like, I had never heard, well, I won't say I'd never heard Bloom before. I had definitely probably heard that at some point, but it was not part of like any sort of regular rotation for me.
Yeah, the original's pretty wild too.
Yeah, the Caroline Shaw tune I had never heard before. So listening to them kind of back to back at first was a little jarring. It was a little like, how are we going to put these two things, from my perspective of having to arrange and write music and connect these two ideas. It was a little scary, but I think exactly what Ricky just said. Whereas one is almost kind of the reaction of the other. And if we were, and I think this is kind of represented in that middle part of the show, like, we're not actually saying these things out loud, but if we were to do that, this is what it might sound like.
Or what it would, I mean, in terms for me,
or at least like, what it would feel like on the
inside. Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Like that triumphant almost type feeling of like, because I had pictured it, I was hinting at like the feeling of a religious experience for a while, kind of not quite literally, but in how it feels so empowered and it feels like mystical when you're looking towards that experience of having that huge sound. I don't know. Well, I mean, Bryson, that's like the Hereditary for Reborn, but we never used that.
But like Bryson, even Bryson and Kevin, like we originally were like, okay, it has to be super euphoric, that moment. And I know we're not at the moments yet and everything, but like it has to be euphoric and it has to be this and that. And eventually we just kind of came to terms with honest. Like that was like the main string of like what that feeling was. The feeling was, I don't know, being honest and be able to, what does honesty feel like, and opening up for the first time and saying something out loud. That's like, that was that was the vibe. It wasn't anything else. So like, and that took us a long time to get there. Like, you know.
Yeah, that was a huge internal struggle for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like all of us, that just kind of forcing in that part of the show kind of allowed us to force ahead through everything else too. So I mean, I had the ending written out, and we kind of had the general idea of having a metric mod going in the ending and stuff too. Is really just that connecting like middle to end, which was a huge struggle. So we had those two tunes, and then what was the other one? I'm totally blanking.
It's the
Vicky. Jeez.
By Andy Akio.
Wow. Yeah. But that was your idea, Kevin, correct?
Yeah. Every year I like to bring something to the table that I feel like I can do a good job arranging.
Yeah.
Just kind of like bare bones. I try to just kind of pick something that's a little bit more rhythmic, a little bit more percussive. And I mean, it's a piano solo, so it's not necessarily, it doesn't have like percussion parts or anything in it already, but it's a prepared piano piece, so it has a lot of that same kind of, yeah, exactly. There's a lot of metallic sounds, and it's definitely very rhythmic at times. And there's a really cool music video for it on YouTube that if you watch it and it's kind of creepy, kind of eerie. Andy Akio's in the background the whole time, just kind of staring at you.
It's creeping.
Yeah, and I just remember watching that and not thinking that this was going to be something we would use for the show. But after one of our design calls, I remember like sitting down and like putting that on and just thinking the way that this makes me feel is exactly what we need in our show. It lines up perfectly for that in-between period of how do you get from having something inside that you don't know how to express, how do you transition from that to maybe possibly expressing it? There's going to be a lot of anxieties and fears and uncertainty and those kind of things.
It's a super dynamic.
I thought we could use that.
Too. Yeah. I also felt like it did correlate pretty well with the Tom York thing. So, I mean, Tom York's thing was solo piano, but I felt like just the general nature of the tune was at least living in the same universe musically. I don't know how to explain that out loud, but
yeah,
it felt like it had
a similar tone to it.
They could speak to each other in a way, I guess.
Wow. I'm just realizing this. Bryson, you came to us with Bloom. I came to you guys with this loud freaking noise.
Oh,
and
yeah.
then Kevin came to us with Vicky, and that was literally after a call. And then Kevin said that in the group chat, and I was like, I'm not listening to this right now. And then I listened to it later, and I was like, hell yeah, this is awesome. So, wow, that's really funny. I didn't realize that. Cool.
And it's interesting, the choir thing just became kind of like the spine of the whole show. It was just like, it kind of gave it more of the organic feel, and I think the fact that we used a bunch of piano pieces was also feeding into that. I mean, I think people would put like piano, vocals, like violin and stuff like that into the general family of like human-esque in terms of playing. And I feel like people personify strings a lot and stuff too as being human, almost in the way like a really good blues guitar player plays, or really anybody, but I guess in terms of pop culture. But I feel like my statement is completely just disregarding all other instruments, but I don't know. I just feel that way for some reason. So yeah, I mean, it felt like everything to me was emphasizing the authentic nature of what was going on or what we were trying to do. And I think even just the fact that we picked that music, had the aesthetics picked out correctly, kind of put everything in the right, perfect, vicious circle to go right, no matter what we were trying to do, at least with, our particular skill sets. I think there's still probably some people that would get those tunes and be like, well, I don't know what to do.
So you're making it sound like we didn't say that same exact thing.
Yes, that's true. Well,
I remember saying that actually in the beginning. I was like, how the hell am I going to do this? We all said that. Don't even.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like just for us and our personalities, we felt strongly about using the individual tunes and felt like they would fit in some way. And they weren't like at least on their own, super jarring. Like you felt like Vicky just would have an interesting vibe, how you were just talking about.
It's funny because I think the part of that piece that I wanted to use and thought fit really nicely with Bloom, I don't think we used at all.
No.
Now that
end, right?
well, we didn't use the end, which I don't think we actually used any of the parts of the piece that I originally suggested. But no, it was the one spot in like the whole thing. There's like 3 minutes of just noise and like prepared piano sounds and kind of creepy things, and then all of a sudden it's just like everything clears out and it's just this like really simple like chord in the left hand and like a repetitive note in the right hand, and it was super kind of minimalistic.
That was the inspiration for the ending, though. I think for the literal ending and for the end of the battery phrase too. I forgot about that.
If it was for you, then cool.
Okay, sorry. But yeah, no, because I think what I was super hot on was the fact that things could just cut out. I think we both like when phrases don't always complete or complete just a.
You're thinking in more of a general idea of what that moment in that piece was, not necessarily the actual music.
Yes.
Gotcha.
I heard that and I was just like, oh, like if we just build something up to silence, and then even the end of the show was continue to like take that silence that we created and then take it to literal silence.
Okay, I'm with you then. Yeah, because it's definitely that feeling of tension that doesn't release.
Yeah, exactly.
It just moves on to something else.
Which was perfect. And I think that's what I was so interested in. I think that you bringing that idea up was what allowed us to actually finish the concept of the show.
Well, there you go.
It's the genius of Kevin Thompson. But honestly, I think that really, put that idea on the table and gave us an actual context to put it in. And then I was also just super into the kind of hit stuff from it, like the loud muted piano note. Yeah. I was just super obsessed with that.
But then we realized we had enough loud stuff in our show. We didn't need more.
Yeah. But ironically, we like led ourselves to our first major hit being like 2.5 minutes into the show, which I kind of liked.
Yeah. 2.5, 3.5. Next year we'll do it 5 minutes in. We'll just only one hit
play it.
Show.
I can't. Please no.
Yeah, we should change that next time. Speaking of things we should change, we should probably do well something towards the beginning.
But I felt like we were sneaky. Like you didn't realize that the first hit wasn't 2.5 minutes in. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't know when we're transitioning to talk about the visual aspect, but like that was a big part of not realizing that the first big major musical hit wasn't until freaking 2.5 minutes in. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I guess I suppose I figured it was just the first general impact that we had.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess it would be letter B the first time the battery comes in. I don't know.
But
I mean, yeah,
D
that was a
like
spot where everybody was playing.
Yeah.
I would think D.
Yeah, D.
You know.
Huh. I think one of my issues is that we don't always capitalize on those moments in the right way. I think we definitely try to steer away from being too loud. So, we all don't like the shoulder shot thing or too many gawk shots indoors. But I think that was the one thing I feel is that, I don't think we should hit a bunch of shoulder shots, but I think we can capitalize on finding ways to make moments feel bigger so that they may be even a similar context to like letter D, but also have a little bit more slap to it, a little more music effect to it.
Yeah.
That's something I just personally feel, but yeah. So obviously the staging was kind of one of the next major parts of the program. We had to write the music and then you had to stage it. And I know you were super obsessed with making sure transitions were good. And it seemed like because you were paying attention to that, you knew what to do, even if it felt like you didn't. Because you kind of prepare like, no, I'm not saying I felt like you didn't know what to do. Like
no, but I didn't. But thanks. Yeah, keep going.
But do you want to talk about how? Because this is something you're trying to correct from previous years, and you were really dead set on fixing some of that stuff. What are your thoughts
Yeah.
on that?
Do you want me to just talk staging strictly or also body? Because if we're
I
talking
think
body, then
both at once.
Christ.
Like,
Okay.
if you can.
So yeah. With the whole staging standpoint, I don't know. I don't really know percussion. So like, and I don't like, and I like kind of know color guard, but I don't really do color guard. So I'm like kind of this anomaly where like I'm just kind of saying you go here and you go there kind of thing. Maybe that's everybody, but I feel like I don't write anything down. I just kind of just like organically like to just place people kind of thing. So with that being said, it's kind of like I kind of have the journey in my head as to where you should look on the floor and different points of interest and how they get there and how they move there. A lot of the staging in the beginning was just supposed to be very chaotic, but yet together, just because it was supposed to be like a dandelion being blown out, into the wind kind of thing. So I was big into the whole condensing and then expanding kind of deal. And then as we kind of went into the rest of the show, it was kind of chaotic. A lot of I like to call them vignettes. Like you knew where your eyes should look, just because the uniform was, the front of it is green, the other side is black kind of thing. So it's like if the snares were playing, you look to the left. If the quads were just playing, you look to the right because everybody else was black. So it's like during those moments, it was super chaotic, and we would kind of outline I don't want to call it the vomit section, but the speaking section, which is that green that leads to the flower. We would outline that in certain parts that kind of felt like they were kind of aloof and like moving and still figuring it out was in the kind of like the black side of things, like where the dandelions meshed in. And then that whole middle point where that kind of feel comes out, a lot of it was on that green, because the whole point about what was super difficult about the staging and just the uniform concept itself is the whole front of the uniform is green, right? But the whole thing is that they're showing you something that they don't really feel. So how do you personify that? How do you do that so it makes sense? You know what I mean? So it's like you have to keep turning them around and turn them in different directions. So it's like you have to tell them, you have to tell your audience that like they don't want to show the green. They really don't. They have to, but they don't want to, So the whole point of that middle section was like, okay, I'm showing you what I'm feeling, and here's a whole bunch of green, and I'm going to give it to you. Then kind of that whole ending was more or less green, but transitioning to that whole back half of the black kind of thing, kind of reverting back to that beginning body sequence kind of deal. Again, with the whole condensing and expanding when appropriate kind of thing. So it's kind of a synopsis of the staging perspective. I don't know if that's super. I've never had to really talk about this before, so I hope that was, decently explained. But from the body perspective, I'll go quick because I could talk all day. The body is very, very important to me. I very much like to give the kids very, very dancey things that are not in a percussion repertoire normally, just because that's, I don't know, it's fun for me to see people do different things. I feel like with our set design being so small, we're literally a 30 by 60 floor. And the average is a 50 by 70. So being that small, it's like, okay, actually we're less than that, I think.
I think so.
I don't know. I think we're smaller. We're not a 30 by 60.
Yeah.
No, we're like a 30 by 50.
And
the standard is a 50 by 70. Yeah. So being that small, you got to be different. You can't be like the run-of-the-mill mark time for 8 and go into a plie. It's not going to get you anywhere. You have to be doing something crazy so the audience is kind of taken into your zone, into your space, because our space is so intimate and small. So that's why they're doing jazz splits. That's why they're doing jump turn rolls. That's why they're doing all these kind of impressive things that people don't normally do, because you got to stand out when you're that small. You already stand out because you're small enough. And a lot of the journey, I feel like, throughout the show, with at least from the body, is that each movement is kind of personifying what they're feeling and how they're emoting, and it's really getting their emotions out, the things that they're grabbing with their hands or how they're moving their legs or something. It's all, and how they're moving their upper bodies. A big nuance and a big kind of motif kind of established this year was a lot of your like emotion comes from your chest. And how I mean that from that is like feel like Michael Jordan when he's touching the basketball in Space Jam, and it looks like he's like throwing up because he's touching that ball. And that was what I told the kids. I was like, you got to feel like that. Like, it's literally coming from your heart.
Have they seen Space Jam?
Yeah, they knew what Space Jam was.
No, literally half of them didn't, so I had to show them the scene.
What?
So, isn't that wild, by the way, that they don't know what Space Jam is? Like,
I mean, most of them probably born after it came out. So
we need Space Jam 2 with LeBron.
There's a Space Jam 2?
No, they just need to make it. Whoever's gonna.
Oh, I was like kind of into it, but I'm almost done. But anyway, there was that whole motif of kind of coming from the chest, and then what do you do with your arms? This kind of pulsing motion that a dandelion would do in the wind, kind of thing. Kind of incorporated that throughout the entire show. And even had a couple gymnastics efforts in there. We had a backflip. It was super cool. And the whole
100%
beginning
accuracy on that, by the way.
What? Sorry.
He had 100% accuracy on that.
He
by the way.
did. And his last one that he did, the last show, nails. If you watch that, he does not move. Like, it's incredible. But anyway, the beginning body was the same exact body that was at the ending, except it was flipped the other way around. So it's like everything that they did the first 30 seconds was the same thing that they did the ending 30 seconds, just to really emulate the whole reversion. It's not time yet for change, and kind of going back to that condensing form. So yeah, that's the whole visual package. I'm sorry, Kevin, I just talked forever, but yeah.
That's okay with me.
So I guess going around that, like I said earlier, I did want to let you have free reign to do whatever you want, or within reason. But like, yeah, I think we've spoken about my kind of fascination with kind of ultra contemporary dance, which stemmed from Suspiria, and then I found out it was the same choreographer for Tom York's video that he did for his album Anima, Damien Gillet. But I started looking at Damien Gillet's stuff, and he was choreographing a bunch of stuff to Ben Frost's music. He's a pretty wild guy. But I just was super into that, and I think combining that with me literally just not caring about adhering to the norms of WGI kind of turns into kind of the product we end up with, for better or worse. I think I'm just more concerned about the product feeling really good, but we just have to figure out a way to do it at the highest level possible in terms of design, which I mean, that's how I feel like a group's identity can be created in the modern age. It's like, what do you really like? You know, make it work at the best level. It's like, if you don't want to be like everyone else, like, here's the thing you can do. Like, here's a different type of choreography you could do or whatever, and then build around that until it's, you know, more mature and fits into WGI better. It's not completely jarring, but actually turns into something that is now a part of everything, can be accepted, and is just, you know, that design
and
team.
Bryson, to your point, it was jarring for years. Like, when I first introduced it 5 years ago, these kids were like, what? Like, they had no idea how to do anything. They were picking their nose. Like, there was no clue. They just kind of bought in. And it was just kind of like, you had to be like, this is where the activity is going. You need to just get on the train, and we're all aboard, and we're going to figure it out. And we're going to do it together. And we're all going to look like idiots together. Like, you know, that was the whole thing.
And I've criticized it before too. Like, Kevin, I remember you and me sitting in stands while we're working and teaching for the first time together, like watching shows, be like, why are these people dancing for so long? Like, I was full on like, what's going on?
I mean, I was definitely of that, you know, because I never did indoor. I started marching DCI before all of that was a really big thing. So I definitely came up with that. Like, drumline is stand and play and march back and forth, and that's it, you know.
Yeah. And it's the same thing, like, when we're at Scouts, there's like watching Blue Knights, there's like, what are these guys doing?
Yeah.
Quite literally watching Ricky march every night. Like, what is happening?
Yeah.
That's wild to me. I still can't.
Like,
that's like wild.
Just completely overlook everything that's going on from an intellectual standpoint. It's like, that triplet roll was dirty, so I don't like it.
So when are we going to clean those roughs, guys? Or those? I don't know. Hopefully by finals we'll get those. Or they'll get those victims in time.
They got there better than we did. So.
Oh yeah, Jesus.
Joke's on us, I guess.
Yeah, joke's on us. we just went downhill. So.
Oh my God, it's getting dark.
Oh, hardly.
Hardly. Yeah.
When it comes to the 2014 summer, it could get a lot worse.
Oh, so sad. That was
Sad
my
times.
fondest memory.
My fondest memory was watching the Blue Night Show from the sidelines. So that's. Anyways, but I do like the fact that we kind of switched 180 on that. I definitely like to take pride in, seeing the other side of things and changing perspectives, even when it's something you're like, this sucks. And now it's like, oh, I like this now. So that's how I am with music. Like, if I don't like a genre of music or I just don't understand it, I just listen to it till I find out things about it, and then I'm just into that genre of music. I guess how I got into electronic stuff, and like film scores and all that, which gets me to where we are today. But I think I like that aspect, like even with having failures and admitting to failures and stuff like that too. Like, kind of what I want to do now is like look back on everything we did and be like, okay, like what sucked about that? You know what I mean? And being able to just be like, oh, I just won't do that again. Like, same Ricky, you're like, oh, my transitions, people are criticizing my transitions. Like, all right, I'll just do that better now.
Oh, I never talked about the transitions. Oh shit. Oh my God.
So
it's like the one thing you like actually brought up.
So I would touch on that really quick just to start this part of the conversation about
That's actually a good segment. Yeah, that's a good transition.
That was a big one. So that was last to this year, which I think we did. I think the visual program improved a lot. We have to work on the marching a lot, but there was so much effect going on, and the transitions were great. They were awesome.
Well, thank you.
Other than
able to fit. I refused to go on until I heard how everything until I heard what it was going to be. Until I knew who was playing exactly when. Because how I transitioned is I literally, like I was telling you, we do like extensive body moves. Like they will literally jazz split and roll into their drum. And that requires you to be 5.5 steps from your drum. Like that's insane. Like you ask a child to do that, really? And it's hilarious because they actually can do those kind of things. They know, they can visually see, okay, I need to be this far to do a double stag jump roll and then get to my drum. It's insane. I never could do that. But anyway, that's how their bodies work. So it's like those transitions, I would make sure I had kind of this visual element where they would do something super impressive visually, and your eye is kind of done with them because it's on to the next thing. But you don't really know that they're picking up their drum or their equipment because you're like, how could they pick up something that quickly out of what they just did? So it was like a lot of things that we did. What, sorry?
That's what I was asking myself while watching it.
Well, for real.
I was like, well, Ricky, I don't think that's going to work.
But for real, like it was like, I think one of my favorite ones was after the backflip, they did kind of this roll that kind of took you all the way to the back of the floor.
That was pretty cool.
Everybody was everybody was on their knee, and you couldn't tell that the flats were putting on their drums in the back. And then when the ripple came back to the front of the floor, they all had their drums on again. You're like, when did they do that? And that's what I love. I love that kind of stuff, The
old David Blaine sleight of hand. Old Chris Angel sleight of hand.
But it took a while to get there. That wasn't overnight. This year was probably, I never talk about shows or anything, but this year I was probably most proud of how a lot of those transitional pieces came out. And yeah, that's about it from my end for that.
Okay. I think the first thing musically for me was the long drawn out beginning. It's totally my fault, but we couldn't get ourselves out of that, and so it turns into, first of all, extremely difficult to play, and second of all, the music effect is not destroyed, but is extremely challenging to come across. And then that was
an interesting moment because the music was so drawn out and so little was happening, but the visual effect in that moment was so powerful that even the music judges would just ignore what was happening in their caption, comment on how great the visual was, and then say nothing negative in their own caption. So it ended up being okay.
Which angered me quite a lot. I was just like, all right, dude, it's not that I was like, why aren't you listening to my music or whatever? I was just like, yo, your captions to like listen to the music, and you're not even like calling like bad things about the effect of the music right now. It's like, bro, like we need the info.
It's so ineffective that they don't even notice that.
But not for nothing. That happened in 2019 in Dayton. The music judges were like, hey, and they completely disregarded stuff that we thought they were going to say stuff on. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So.
But yeah,
starting to notice a trend here.
Yeah. I mean, it's good. I mean, things are improving. So like, as one thing improves, like if something isn't up to that level, then it's just not gonna be cohesive. It's like not necessarily blatantly negative. I think the part that was the most bad was that it was difficult to hit isolated hits across an ensemble when you're in high school, and trying to train that is super difficult. We actually did it, I thought, really well last year, but we also had less of that in a way. We're trying to get more people on these isolated marimba parts.
Well, yeah, last year they'd have all that isolated stuff, but there'd be like snare, rough, 9-lit, 5-lit diddle shots happening the entire time behind them. So
also true. So I think that's
we could talk about last year's shortcomings all night long. So
yeah, I think that's
honestly,
the first one, like that was bad.
We could transition to the music side by just saying this: like, I'm not by any means a drummer. I never have been. I don't know what a diddle is, and I just defer to Kevin when I'm writing, because I'm like, okay, do the snares need to be together here? Do the flubs need to be close to the tenors? Whatever it is when I'm staging. And then that's where I'll kind of do that. But like, for example, I'm going to use a term, so please don't judge me. The gok shot right before C. Hey now, right?
Was that a gok shot?
Was it? Maybe not. But it was right before C, right before the plie, right before the metric spot.
Sure.
Oh.
Oh,
okay.
It was just a shot. It was just a...
Oh, okay. Well, I was close. Okay. But anyway. They were on literal opposite sides of the floor, so we had to kind of adjust stuff. So we were talking about mistakes before, so maybe I kind of should have had them all together at that point,
In which we were going to change.
Which we did change on Monday, Bryson. And then the season ended on Tuesday, Bryson.
Wednesday. I was about to go to rehearsal.
It was such a good change, too. It was a flower and it opened with the cymbal. Oh. I'm fine. I'm good.
I'm crying about it, right?
I'm fine.
So, yeah, I mean, we already had the list of visual changes. We're just like, all right, we need to do that. We did them. And we didn't get to really fully do them. But I guess in terms of everything else, I mean, obviously our main comment that hit us in the soul was the fact that it was too hard, which was true.
It's true.
It was. I mean, it's been a battle. I think you can talk about this, Kevin, us just trying to figure out, which is like, it seems obvious. It's like, okay, just don't write hard parts. But it's like something.
Yeah, but you can't also just do that.
Yeah.
Because then if you're just writing easy parts, then you lose, I think, a little bit of the educational value behind the season as well.
Yeah.
But.
So there's that kind of balance. It's like, all right, so the parts need to be easier. And I think writing easier, not even say easy parts, just easier parts, is also an art in itself, trying to find something that musically works great. I think when we get our stock shows for the fall, that's something we definitely notice, like, oh, it's just written to the show really well, and we can just kind of do what we need to do to it, and it'll be effective. But now that we've gotten to the end of the season and we got that criticism, which I think was deserved, how do you feel about your own response to that, and how you think you might approach things in the future?
Yeah, I could talk a while about this. I'll try to keep it concise.
Don't talk forever. I talk way too much, please.
So that's something I think about all the time, and I've kind of gone back and forth like about how I feel, like whether the part should be a little bit too hard and you work towards it, or if the part should be easy and like you just make it really clean, and if you beef something up later on down the road, you can do that. And I don't necessarily think either one of those options should be what you're striving for, right? Like I think the end goal should always be to write the parts perfectly appropriate, but that's obviously super difficult to do.
Especially because you're also distanced from us as well.
Yeah, that's hard to do because I'm not there every day, watching these kids rehearse and understanding the ins and outs of how they learn things and what they're struggling with and what they're getting better at. And I think we do a pretty good job of communicating,
Yeah.
and making sure that we're talking about all that stuff. But it's definitely a difficult thing to nail down. But like moving forward, I just think understanding the risk reward aspect of it, I think, is huge. Especially for the indoor thing. Like, obviously, we don't want to write super easy music for our show because then there's going to be a certain amount of effect that's lost if we're just doing super basic stuff.
Right.
But then, understanding, like, if we're going to take these risks, like, what's the reward of that? Is this risk going to be worth taking? And is it something realistic to do as well? Like, obviously, the environmental demand that we have is already an inherent risk in and of itself with the music. And I think that's something for us that's always worth taking because the visual impact of it is so strong. But then maybe that means we don't take as many risks with the vocabulary and playing fast rudiments and stuff like that. And just focus on the demand of the music being like space and playing weird rhythms far apart on the floor while doing all this dancing stuff. But then, like, moving forward into like the fall season, because I think we kind of set ourselves up for failure in this department this year in the fall. Like, the fall book was too hard, and that's an area where you can get away with doing easy stuff because nobody cares about the difficulty. If you guys are playing clean, playing with a good sound, and playing in time, supporting the band, literally, like, no one's even going to pay attention to you, at least in our circuit. So I think that's the biggest thing.
Like Vandegrift.
Yeah.
Like, their music wasn't super hard, but I think that was like my favorite band show. And I just liked how it sounded, how it looked, how they played. And that opener was probably my favorite thing in marching arts that whole year in general. I thought it was super well written. I don't know who was doing it.
They were playing hard stuff, but if you compare it to some other groups and if you think about how well they're executing it, you immediately realize, like, that book could have been written harder, but it wasn't.
Yes. Yeah.
But it also wasn't lame. It wasn't like vanilla and bland. It was still super musical and super exciting.
Correct. So,
that's moving forward the place I want to find. Like, how can we make the fall book a little easier so we can start working the kids with more advanced intellectual concepts of how to play clean and how to stay inside the sound for extended phrases and sound quality things, so that when we get to the indoor season, we can ramp up the risk a little bit and understand how to achieve those things maybe a little bit better, and understand, like, if you're playing out of a role, like, now, because the fall book was easy and you played clean for a whole season, you understand what that feels like.
Yes.
So they can individually clean themselves because they can feel and they can hear when they're not in it.
It's going to be interesting this upcoming fall, if we kind of take our step back to our first year when we're playing that Dystopia show where the music was easy, but it was just, and there was open spaces and it was just way cleaner than anything we'd ever worked with in that realm, I suppose. I think our past schools were also doing and achieving pretty crazy things, just in a weird context. But
weird is one way to put it.
This will be our first step back to that and seeing, hopefully, and seeing what the impact of that's going to be. I mean, we could go back to those beats and, the same teaching style that we've improved upon might be able to make it just as good as it was before, because we're not trying to consistently think about every single hand speed change, every single variation in the grip to achieve all these crazy rhythmic changes. So I think it's just going to defer energy to the right places, and then we'll have that extra time, like you're saying, to do exactly what you're talking about with understanding how to play clean, understanding how to listen and balance. I'm sure it's going to be positive. I mean, the whole virus thing is not helping that right now. But the internet classroom thing is, the next step. And I think a
Well,
lot
I'll
of
tell
that.
you what, if there's one positive thing to take out of it, it's the fact that it's taken us over an hour to mention that. So
Yeah.
I try.
Good
good
point,
for
Kevin.
us.
Wow.
If you've made it
I'm
this
really
far,
proud.
I hope this doesn't bother you. But yeah, I mean, the next step, actually, I guess if we want to just sidetrack, I think this is interesting to talk about. I was just kind of bringing this up with Andy Kim and Jabari at Spartans and Mansfield and Salem and stuff the other day, and I'm curious to see, and I'm sure everyone's having the same thought, that we have to move our early season fall drumline rehearsals online. And probably to Google Classroom, and then do that amongst video assignments. And what I'm interested in seeing is if we find ways that are more effective to teach in certain ways, because we're forced to focus on the stick yogas and the claps of the technique world, all the stroke types, because it would just be easier to do that right away, especially with freshmen, just like getting people's mechanics going. And then cultivating that individually, and then getting a lot of direct individual feedback. And then hopefully, once we get back together, we can have that foundation and just start to build upon that in a more intuitive way. I'm wondering if it's going to work out that way, if done correctly. Or if groups are just going to fold because kids can't commit to doing video assignments when they're not in rehearsal, which is what I'm scared about.
I
But
do
I
think there's going to be a lot of that for sure.
I think it's going to depend
For
on your
sure.
program, the leadership, and if kids fully grasp, like, okay, like, this has never happened before. This is the only way that this is going to happen, and we need to treat this as a legitimate thing, or else we're going to be bad. pretty much
Yeah.
that.
Well, I'll tell you what's like, people are going to have to just get comfortable with the idea that, like, maybe, fingers crossed everything works out and like the fall season is going to happen, but like maybe it doesn't start so early.
For real.
I'm
Like
assuming
maybe it's
gonna
a
get
shorter
postponed.
season still.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or maybe programs will need to be comfortable with not putting out a full show right away.
Yeah, which is fine. Honestly.
Because I think inevitably asking high school kids, especially freshmen who have never done this before and don't understand what it is, like, you can do as much technique foundation stuff online through video assignments and like Google Classroom or whatever. And that stuff can definitely be effective. And I think with the already dedicated students, that'll be like, will pay dividends in the long run. But
yeah,
there's no way. I mean, we're talking about high school programs. Like, there's no way 100% of those kids are going to care enough,
Yeah,
and
because programs
it's
can
also, yeah, oh, for sure. I mean, it's a lot of teachers who are not going to be comfortable with that enough to go through with it either. They're not going to, they're going to say, I know how to stand in front of this drum line, click my sticks, tell kids to turn their wrists and keep their taps down. And those comments work usually, and I don't have to use my brain to assess what's actually happening and teach. So it's like you get into this online thing where they're going to have to watch a video and comment on it. It's like you're going to have to find more information. And I think on both sides, student and teacher, there's definitely going to be areas and programs that suffer for sure.
And it's like, if you don't know how to teach, or if you haven't at least been trying to figure out and understand yourself and what you know and trying to improve upon that, like, you're SOL. It's like you're going to have to figure it out, or else, things are going to go south for your program real fast.
Yeah. I mean, on the flip side of that too, I mean, I think there'll be a lot of valuable things that come for.
And that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah. Like I think it will be successful for some people.
Because, I mean, there could be things that carry over in the future, like the way people carry out the beginnings of their seasons. Maybe they're like, oh, I prefer to just start online because it worked and paid dividends in the way that we did it.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's like online for certain times, or if people are on vacation, that's now an option that's not totally weird, where maybe they're just doing this on vacation. They send you a video, they're clicking against the sticks doing the 100 rep thing, and it's like, all right, good.
It could impact the music learning process too. Like, some kids show up to rehearsal and they expect that just by showing up to rehearsal they're going to learn it or they're going to get better, and it's going to put more ownership on them. And I think there will be definitely kids who fold under that responsibility, but I think there will be a lot of kids, maybe even the majority of which, who will learn a new understanding of that responsibility. And moving forward, then maybe that's going to benefit you when you have those weekly rehearsals. Kids are going to show up prepared because now they understand, like, they can go home and learn that stuff, and then because they did it, when they had to.
Right. I'm kind of excited about teaching that too. It's just like, hey guys, magical concept. If you just play things and learn them as slow as you're comfortable with and at the speed that you're comprehending at the same time, it's like, guess what? You're going to be way more accurate 100% of the time, at least closer. If you're more experienced, you'll be able to like learn things, actually get them in your hands, as opposed to trying to play them fast and just screwing everything up. I guess what I'm saying is, like, I'm excited about teaching how to learn properly and seeing how that goes on the independent level with the kids, I guess.
Instead of just force feeding.
Yeah, because I think that's what's going to, like you're saying, is what's going to be interesting. Like, if the students are being individually accountable, we're putting them in that setting and also giving them the correct information on, setting goals. Like, you're not going to feel like you get better every single day, but do that for a super long time, trying to improve one thing, you're going to get better.
For sure.
Again, practicing at your own learning pace, not playing it fast to where you're just not even comprehending what's going on. I guess it energizes the part of me that's just super ultra obsessed with technique and philosophy, which maybe is not, like you're saying, everyone's focus. Maybe they're just a little more, in the moment, just like, all right, play that.
Show up and do it.
Yeah.
If you say the same comment that was said to you, it's bound to work.
Bound to. But yeah, so I mean, that's obviously the first thing. Maybe the season's delayed and it goes on the same amount of time. It goes further in November. I don't know how that would even work. I think band camp is kind of the one thing that's kind of locked in that is going to be affected, because we have to do it before school starts when we have all that time, or else it's probably going to be deferred to weekends, which would be immensely destructive to the overall progress and building of a program, I would imagine.
I can't even think about that. Jesus. I'm not even.
Yeah, I think we've put
I'm
Ricky
not.
as a shot for this whole.
Yeah, I won't get dark on drum corps.
No, let's not. Let's please not go there. I can't.
Drum corps is dark enough on itself.
Let's see where things are at, like April 1st, then I'll start getting dark. And then May 1st, then I'll start getting really dark. But let's
It gets darker, Ricky, when you think about the logistical things that you'd have to work out post this. As a tour director, just think about it and don't even talk about it.
I will not talk about it. But you know my brain has been going since this whole thing has started. Like, because what I would be doing right now in like tour director land.
Yeah. I don't want to talk about it because I don't want to
don't
give people the bad mojo.
Maybe it's just not time yet. Just don't.
It's not time yet. But yeah, fall band. Hopefully good. If not, WGI next year. Here we come.
Mm-hmm. I'm into it. Let's go. I told Bryson, if we don't do fall band, the whole band is learning how to play drums. I'm gonna have an A line and an open line. I'll be there every day at Newtown High School teaching everybody. Okay, we'll buy a box. We'll buy a regular show.
Ensemble cartwheels.
Hey, no, if it means I get to write multiple shows and make multiple paychecks, I'm down. Whatever you want to do, guys.
You act like you get paid. Okay, we're gonna stop.
I act like I get paid. You're right. I do.
No, like I didn't finish my statement, but it's fine.
So it's getting super late. Do we have any other things we want to mention, even brief things before we get off? No, we can only talk for so long. Even like virus related, doesn't matter.
Did we talk about everything? We talked about everything show related, right? Kev, did you get it all out? Because I talk a lot.
There's not that much in there, man. I'll tell you that. I just write beats.
That's a lie, please. You don't just write beats.
I mean, they can be perceived however they are by other people, but the secret sauce is that I sit down at the computer and I grab my pad and I say, all right, what fun, cool beats can we play this year? And I write that down and I send it to you guys, usually late. So.
No, you were so on time. We were
you were
so
solid.
schedule oriented this year with all the freaking
I'll tell you what, I had all those changes up in the score. I had a whole Google Doc telling you guys where every single little change was ready to send, and then no more WGI.
See what happens when you try? Everything gets taken away from you.
Yeah, moral of the story, don't try so hard.
Don't try too hard. You meet those deadlines, you might lose them in general.
Yeah, what's the point of meeting a deadline if the one time I do it, the deadline disappears?
Don't let that condition you for the future, I suppose.
Oh.
Watch, it's going to happen again. It's going to resurface in like a year, and you're just like, well, maybe it's time to give up, guys.
But honestly, there's my retirement party. I'm telling you. That happens. What are we going to do on our sequel podcast? You know? There's got to be a sequel.
I mean, was this one good enough for a sequel?
Was it? I don't know. The ratings will tell, Kevin. The ratings.
I don't think the ratings tell people to stop either. Do you know how many Sharknadoes there are? I think there's 3. There might be more. Like, have you ever seen Sharknado?
No.
No. Have you seen? Do you
Wait,
know?
What's a Sharknado?
Sound it out.
Is it like a tornado of sharks?
Yeah, man.
Exactly.
Is that what it is?
Yeah. And Tremors.
No, I'm serious. Like, is that what it is?
Yes, I'm not joking.
Is this gonna make the podcast? I really hope it does. This is great.
Sharknado? Absolutely. You kidding? Tremors, Sharknado, every like sequel to Friday the 13th, Freddy Krueger, Halloween. You know,
I don't watch that.
It's for the best.
Do you remember Are You Afraid of the Dark on Nickelodeon? I didn't even watch that.
I didn't watch that either. Actually.
No.
I couldn't handle the first Cowardly Dog. So, in summation, yes, there could be a sequel, no matter how bad this is.
I think this was fun. I don't know. I hope our viewers think so. Who's the demographic?
Anybody.
Like 10 people on Facebook.
10 people on Facebook and my Instagram. So, all right.
No, I shouldn't judge it based off of how many people watched mine. This will be at least twice as many.
Wait, I'm gonna go look. Oh wait,
I didn't watch the Aged Out podcast like before like their 30th one or whatever. Longest time, it took them that long for me to even realize they existed, and realize they exist, and also decide to listen to it.
It's true.
But I just do this because I think it's fun, and I think it's important to just have a voice in the Connecticut area talking about anything for other people to hear.
If somebody talks, somebody will listen.
Maybe we can all be friends. All right, I'll let you guys go to sleep. I'm gonna try and go to sleep and see what happens. So I'll see you.
All right.
This is great. Bye.
Okay. All right.